There was a time in the ministry of Jesus when following him had become popular. But Jesus knew that the path he was taking would lead him to the cross. And he was concerned that some of these people had not yet counted the cost of what they were doing. Jesus wanted people to understand that to follow him involved a serious decision. So he told them about a king. This king was not very powerful and his kingdom was small, but it seemed secure. And when the sun rose that morning, neither the king nor his generals nor his counselors would have guessed that the next few hours would change the future. A routine patrol had just returned from the frontier, and the news they brought to the king's officials was disturbing. They had seen soldiers, foreign soldiers. The details were still unclear, but one thing was certain. A military force of some size had entered the kingdom. The question was how serious this might be. The king himself must decide. The man who brought this report must be questioned very carefully. Every piece of information was important. Who were these invading soldiers? And the scout's report, how much of it was second-hand? Perhaps it was exaggerated. And what was it he had actually seen? Soon it became clear. It was a serious threat. Another king, great and powerful, had a claim to sovereignty over this land, and now he was coming with his army. So this king felt threatened. But he was not stupid. He knew his kingdom could not exist in isolation, and it was not very large. He could give his allegiance to another, stronger king, or he could always fight for himself alone. His counselors could express their opinions, but in the end, this must be the king's decision, and he must make it soon. First, he needed more information, and he needed it quickly. The scouts must return to the frontier. These men were the eyes and ears of the king, and their instructions were clear. They must travel fast, and they must go in different directions. The scouts must learn what they could, but they must not engage the enemy. Above all, they themselves must not be captured. They were not looking for a fight, they were looking for answers. How far had the invader come into their land, and in what direction was this army marching? Was the invading army concentrated in just one place, or was it spread out? If it was crossing the frontier at several different places, then it could be difficult to estimate the total size of their forces. And to go into battle without this knowledge could be fatal. It was not enough to be accurate. Their information must also be as complete as possible. The king must know the size and disposition of the army coming against him. It was not difficult to find the invading forces. They seemed to be everywhere. The king prepared himself and waited for the report to come in. At this point, there was no way of knowing what he must do. Fight or negotiate a surrender. He just did not know. It was not enough to be brave. He must be wise, and he must count the cost of what he was doing. This was the most important decision in his life. He must do the right thing. At last, the king knew the whole truth. It was more serious than he had imagined. His kingdom had an army of 10,000 men. The army coming against him was 20,000. If he chose to fight, his army would be defeated, his land would be taken, and he would lose his kingdom. He decided he would surrender. One question remained. How precisely was he to do this? Should he wait for the invading army to come near the city, or go out to meet the opposing king before he came any closer? He decided to send ambassadors while the invading army was still near the frontier, but he himself would stay in the capital city. One thing was clear. The future of the kingdom and his own future were now in other hands. So, in the same way, said Jesus, if you are not willing to surrender all that you have, you cannot be a disciple of mine. Were they ready to do that? Had they really thought about it? It was time to decide. We are like the king in the story. We like to do things our way, to please ourselves. But just when we think we're in control of our destiny, we're confronted with the claims of Jesus Christ. Jesus claims sovereignty over us, and we must decide how to respond. There is a cost in saying yes to his plan for our lives, and sometimes that cost can be very high. But surely, the cost of refusal, the cost of saying no to Jesus, is in the end to lose everything. So the story is a challenge, and we must make up our minds. We cannot have it both ways. We must choose the path. Why not read the parable for yourself? It's just a few verses in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14.